Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Got a special programme for you today. We sometimes like to go in depth in things and look at matters, not just that are happening at Holyrood or Westminster. And this is one of you, perhaps some of you may have heard of the Tinker experiments. Now, I hadn't till it was alerted to me by my good friend Eva Comrie. And when I started investigating it, I was quite horrified that this could happen and not know. And I would imagine that's the position for an awful lot of people in Scotland. Well, we're hoping today to cast a little light on it. And I hope you'll stay with us while we do that. So let me firstly bring in Eva. Eva, welcome.
Hello there, Roddy. Thanks very much for doing this special tonight. And I think it's really important that our viewers understand what the Tinker experiment is, particularly because it remains the case that Gypsy, Traveller and Roma communities are amongst the most discriminated against in our country. They are recognised quite correctly as a minority ethnic group, but I think many people in Scotland don't realise that that's the case. And I hope that tonight's episode casts a light on what have been some very dark and difficult days for this community. And I certainly hope that there are better days ahead for all of them.
Hear, hear. And to help us in this discussion, I'd like to invite in two travellers. One, Roseanna McPhee.
Hello. Thanks for having us, Roddy.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for making time for us.
I'm sure I've got plenty of that.
Oh, lucky you. And Lynne Tammi, as I was told, it sounds like a Tammi hat. There you go, Lynne.
That's it.
Welcome. Thanks, and thank you.
Thanks for the invite, Roddy and Eva.
Thanks.
Well, I hope we can cast some light, but I'm here tonight to be educated more than anything else. Starting with you, Eva, could you just lay out for our viewers the sort of background to what's actually happened?
Well, indeed, there are very many different strands here, and I know I can only provide a very basic summary because obviously Lynne and Roseanna have lived experience and living experience of some very major difficulties that there have been for their community. The Scottish Government is now doing some so-called research into the possibility of an apology for the Tinker experiment, which Roseanna will be able to speak about in great detail because she, unfortunately, with her family, have been victims of that. And Lynne has a slightly different perspective insofar as Lynne has worked with Gypsy Traveller communities for a very long time and worked in human rights, as has Roseanna. But Lynne's about to embark on a trip to Canada to do with some dreadful experiences of her ancestors. So I think both ladies would be able to tell us in pretty raw, poignant detail about some of the disgraceful conduct that there has been on the part of government and I suppose religious institutions, certainly within Scotland, towards the Gypsy Traveller community over decades. And so perhaps, Lynne, you might wish to speak first of all about your trip, what your trip involves and why you're making this now and what your hopes are for it, please.
Okay. First off, thank you for calling me a lady. I've not been called that for a long, long time, but there you go. Thank you. Roddy was saying at the start that, you know, he's here to learn and he hopes that the audience will learn something tonight as well. So maybe it's an idea to start with a wee history lesson because this does go back some time.
Yep.
And it goes back to the late 1800s. And that was when the what we're now describing, what's now termed the Tinker experiments. And I think it's important to say right at the start that we haven't called it that. That's what the authorities of the day termed it. So we, of course, reserve the right to use that terminology today because that was how we were described back then. What we see, I'm sure Roseanna will talk more about this when she comes on, but what we see as being what essentially gave a green light to the Tinker experiments was what we refer to as a report, but I've got it written down, the full title of this report, because I can never get it in my head, it's so long. But it was a report that was tabled at Westminster in 1895 by George Trevelyan, and a lot of folk will probably have heard that name, Trevelyan, and know quite a bit about it. They were quite infamous, that family. So the then Secretary of State for Scotland, the report that he laid before Parliament was the Departmental Committee on Habitual Offenders, Vagrants, Beggars and Inebriates in Scotland. And so you understand why we just refer to it as a report. A large chunk of that report looked at what they described then as the Tinker problem. So this is how we were starting to be described. We were set up as a problem. There's a lot. The report's almost 800 pages long, and there's a sizable chunk of the report that addresses the Tinker problem. And in fact, it's no funny, but we do have a laugh about this, Roseanna, don't we? That there's a special place in their hearts for the Tinkers of Perthshire, particularly those ones in Pitlochry, which is where Roseanna is. So you even get a special mention, don't you, by people that holidayed up in Pitlochry back in those days and were highly offended by the fact that there were Tinkers there. And they wanted them rid of. And in fact, I'm going to read you a wee quote from the report itself. This was from a man who at the time was head of education in Glasgow City. And so he obviously holidayed up in Perthshire. He was of that class that he was able to do that. The evil is increasing, to my knowledge, and has been for 10 or 12 years. The object of the committee, I think, might be to try to get these Tinkers absorbed into the labouring population. And I think that might be done, so to speak, by driving them into villages, and the whole Tinker clan thus gradually brought into association with other labourers. My object is to have them extirpated as a class. Extirpated is an ancient word. I had to go, I'm like, that can't mean what I think it means, but it does. It means to eradicate. So, there's that. So extirpated as a class and absorbed in the labouring population. That is the purpose I have in view. I think it is absolutely necessary and should be done. So there you have it. So, sorry, that's my doorbell. It will stop in a minute.
We'll see when you come back.
I'm here.
Oh, you're back.
Sorry.
I was going to say, but the kind of things they did was they drove people, the travelling community, into housing, substandard housing they gave them. Am I right?
They did.
And
Roddy.
And they took children away. Forced adoption, Roseanna.
They did.
Yes,
sorry about that.
Yeah. Sorry, Lynne.
Sorry. Yes, they did. Part of this is what became from that report became the Tinker experiments, and there were two strands to that, and one was removing children from families, and a lot of them were placed in homes in Scotland. My own family experience of that was with quarriers, so I can only speak of quarriers here. Bernardo's, Annie McPhee, there were many charities did this, but I can only speak of quarriers because that's our experience. So what they did was they took children from families, and in our family's case, the men were away to work, and they took the mother, who had three of the youngest children with her, to Perth Poorhouse, the cruelty man, a Mr. Mackenzie, and had her sign over these three girls. I have the paperwork, and her signature is an X mark because she was illiterate. And her understanding of what had been told to her was that she could get them back anytime she wanted. And this is what she told the men. And the men then tried to get these girls back. They had the local priest wrote on their behalf, a teacher, a scholar wrote on their behalf, but all to no avail. And actually what the mother had signed over was that quarriers could, when they saw fit, traffic them to Canada. And that's, I always get real emotional when I talk about this. I probably shouldn't, because I tell the story so much, but so the three girls were held at quarriers for 3 years. And when the youngest of them reached 9 years old, the three were trafficked to Canada, to Quebec, and then onward to a place called Brockville in Ontario, to what they themselves described as, quarriers themselves described as, a distribution centre. So that kind of tells you what they were going to hear. And there they were paraded, and families would go and choose which child they wanted. The children then went into indentured service, which basically meant they were servants with no pay till they reached adulthood. And in fact, they were promised something like $1 a month, but the people that had them, mainly farmers when it was boys, held on to the money, so they didn't get any money until they were old enough to leave. For the boys, most of them lived in barns with no heating. They were abused. They were fed scraps. They weren't made part of the family at all. They were supposed to be educated when they were young. According to quarriers, no child under 12 would go into service, but we have evidence. Our youngest girl, Gracie, was just 9, and she was put into indentured service as a housekeeper with a family. So quarriers weren't doing checks, they weren't interested. They were paid a nice amount of money by the government to send children. So there were commodities. There was income there to be made, and they happily used it. Now, I think it's important to say that it wasn't just Gypsy Traveller children that were shipped. If anybody's following the child abuse inquiry, they might have noticed there's recently just a report come out about what was called child migration programme. And there was almost 150,000 children trafficked from the UK during that period, right up to the 1970s. And my belief is that, and it's what I'm trying to prove in my research at the moment, is that the state used that programme as a cover to send Gypsy Traveller children, because nobody was asking questions. Quarriers and so on were not asking, what is the ethnicity? The child inspectors, the cruelty men, because it mainly was men at the time, were just taking the children and sending them to the children's homes, who then trafficked them. So my belief is that it was an easy route for the government, given what's written in that report, that were to be extirpated. It was an easy programme to hide the fact that Gypsy Traveller children were being trafficked. So fast forward, we know where our girls went. We know what happened to them, because my grandfather was, I think I took after him, was pretty tenacious, didn't let go, kept writing. We were able, although they had a name change, we were able to track them. My grandfather didn't have the means to go out there, but my father did. So there is one daughter of one of the girls still alive, who I have contact with. And I did a crowdfunder recently, and I can't explain how I feel about so many people donating to it, because I didn't think so many people would want to see me making it over to Canada. So crowdfunder was successful, and I'm going out to Canada, to Brockville, where they were trafficked to, on 4th of November. I'll be there for a week, where I'll be meeting up with descendants of other, what they call the British home children out in Canada, children that were migrated or trafficked, which is the real the terminology that we should use. So I'll be
Did
doing
any
that.
others-
And
did-
sorry,
There was a lot
sorry,
of kids. There was a lot of kids sent to Australia as well.
Yes.
Illegitimate children were
Right.
travellers' children sent to Australia as well.
Not
Yes.
so many. Most of them went to Canada, but there were some sent to
Yeah.
Australia. And the problem with that as well, Roseanna's nodding there, and she's right, and she knows this too. A lot of them had their names changed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that is why it's been difficult. You know, people don't know where their children
Yeah.
went because, you know, a lot of them had different names. Ours were given a different name. So, you know, there are people in Australia, people in Canada don't know what their heritage is. They just don't know. And, you know, the program, the migration program, the larger program was supposed to be, well, Quarriers Homes called themselves the Orphan Homes of Scotland. So that was supposed to be orphans that were being sent out there. But we know for a fact that, well, my family, they weren't orphans, you know, and many, many families, because it became a lucrative business for the charities. It was big money, and it was guaranteed money. And this is all mentioned in the recent report that's come out from the Child Abuse Inquiry. It came out just in September there. So if anybody wants to look more into that, the bigger programme, it's there to read. It's quite harrowing, actually. So yeah, so for me, it's almost like full circle for me, but it's also a bit of closure for me, because I have never been able to lay what happened to those girls to rest. It is always there. And, you know, even now, some nights I'm waking up and you're lying, you know that when you're lying at night, can't get to sleep. And I think about it must be like for them being put on that ship, you know, away from their family, and then ending up in this strange country.
It was just like the clearances before.
Absolutely.
But if I could just to you for a second, Eva, it's classical colonialism. You know, they did it with they emptied the prisons of London and sent them to Australia. Illegitimate kids, orphans, travellers' kids, and it was also that they could their imperialism was protected by new blood coming into the countries that they wanted to subjugate.
It's absolutely terrifying, and quite frankly, it's
Yeah.
chilling.
Yeah.
I'm wondering from Lynne, what year was that your girls were sent there?
That was 1913 they were sent there. So that was just before, well, no, it was before the Great War, before the First World War. There was a pause, but as soon as the war was over, they picked up again.
Okay.
So the only thing that stopped them was a world war. And then it was back to business. And it was business.
Yeah, absolutely, a business. Absolutely. Roseanna, have you found any of your family anywhere in the globe?
Yes, I was at a Clan McPhee thing recently, and one of them asked me what a tinker was because he found himself related to tinkers from Perthshire. Said, well, you've got one sitting next to you. But yeah, they are all over the place. I mean, there's people contacted us from South Africa, Australia. I was talking about Australia there because a lady, I've got a friend there, and she contacted me and said, the clan chief of McPhee there is friendly with someone who's a racehorse owner, and he's got this champion racehorse, and it's called Tinker McPhee, and it's won all the cups because his wife, who I think her name was Shaw, I can't quite remember, but her mother again was a McPhee who was put over to Australia. So I don't know if it's about, if they were part of this Tinker experiment. It could well have been, because in one case, one of the people said, you know, the children were put on a boat, but didn't mention the parents, and I never got a chance to really talk more about that. But I was going to pick up on what Lynne said there about the pause this during the war. They didn't really. They were planning to do more because in 1917, the Departmental Committee on Tinkers, and I'm going to use this word tinkers, which Scottish Government have said they don't want us to use anymore. But I'm using it because I think we deserve the right to use it after being called that, labelled that for years and put into appalling conditions and kept there, charged for them. The Departmental Committee on Tinkers under the 8th Duchess of Atholl, Catherine Ramsay, who was the first Scottish woman in Westminster Parliament, she was the chair and reported to the Secretary of State for Scotland. And basically she put out a letter around all the boroughs to everyone and anyone who was a great and a good, and asked them about the social makeup of the tinker population, as they called it then. It was a misnomer, but that's what they called them. And she was collating all this information, and they were holding evidence gathering sessions in Perth and Aberdeen and Glasgow and Argyll and Inverness. And when you read the evidence gathering sessions, the people who were most predominant about getting the child as early as possible to knock the tinker out of it, because we must get rid of the scourge of the tinker, was the Church of Scotland. So they didn't really pause it. They were just preparing for when the war was finished. They were doing the preparatory work, and I think they did the preparatory work from 1895 onwards until 1932. Dorothy Maitland, who was Church of Scotland Board of Social Responsibility and also on that committee, departmental committee in Tinkers, went down to England. She went to Sussex to see a camp where people were sort of boarded up a bit like, say, one of the reservations that the first generation American or first generation Canadians were rounded up into. And she came back and said, well, that would made recommendations about how they would have to stop us getting out. They could do that in Scotland here, but they would have to stop the local shops from selling the meths in case if they couldn't get alcohol and they couldn't get in the bars. And I know that for a fact because my grandfather's brother came back from the war and he went to go into the bar here for a drink when he first came off straight back from the war. And he got turned away as a tinker. You're not allowed in here after fighting in the war, from 1939 to 45. My dad said the same. He was in the Navy from 39 to 47. When he went back, he was turned away from one hostelry as a tinker as well. But that was in preparation. Now, the reason why I'd say the preparation was so long, it's going back to what Lynne was saying about extirpating people. That's basically eradicating the whole culture. And they can massage the term how they like, but it fits 4 out of the 5 UN criteria on genocide, and it only needs to fit one for a complaint to trigger an investigation. So we're sitting tight to wait to see, and those criteria were to create circumstances to, in part or whole, get rid of a whole group, whether it be racial, ethnic or religious, and you see it happening all the time all over the world, to create conditions where they couldn't procreate, like they couldn't marry. And that happened in the huts here. There's, my family was a big family, only one married, and she sort of had to give her culture up to do so. I don't know, I've seen a lot of people do that and they're not special. They're never 100% happy having to live a different life, pretend they're someone else. And then there was another family behind me and they all died by the age of 53 and not one of them was married. So that certainly happened. They just wiped out whole generations completely of the culture. There's no one to pass anything on to, even the culture. And to create conditions that would deliberately inflict mental or physical harm. Well, they did that again because they made it substandard and dehumanising. And I think that's, for me, the things that link these two aspects is that it was all about extirpation, whether it was to put the younger people abroad, as the John O'Groats Times reported it very bluntly, the best thing we can do is put all the young people and children onto boats and put them abroad. Leave the older one to the colonies, leave the older ones here and they'll die out anyway, and that will be the end of the tinker. The scourge, we'll get rid of the scourge of tinkerdom. But that was dehumanising and telling kids that their parents didn't want them or they were dead, totally dehumanising. And then putting them in degrading conditions like we were in, it's still substandard.
Rosemary, could you explain that to us? What happened to your family? You were made to settle and you were stopped from travelling.
Yeah. My family, I know people are saying they weren't, but because they camped here in the woods, but they camped at will and used to go to Crieff or over to Angus or wherever for work, like lots of families. And probably that may have been partly why Lynne's family was travelling. I don't know, Lynne, but, they used to travel in the summer to get work in different regions. And they were back here and they were camped down there and they got, I 33 summonses because the town were saying, oh, there's a scourge, there's tinkers, camp down there. And they were starting to, say you can't camp there. The landlord who owned it, the aristocratic family, they weren't bothering too much. But then the whole delegation came down, and it included cruelty, police, everything, a heavy-handed delegation. I read about it there. And the next thing, they were put in the hut. Even in the hut, if you didn't go to school, there was people knocking the door, and there was at least 2 cousins taken because they were taken to school with the mothers, but they were running away from school at dinner time and break time because school was such a horrific experience. It was like culture shock when you went to school. And they weren't allowed to travel, really. I mean, that's been going on for a long, long time, and virtually there's no stopping places now. They're all boarded up, bouldered up, and there's nowhere to go, there's no transit sites, nothing. So that's been a long preparation to get them off the road. And there's other current attacks on our culture at the moment through the Scottish Government as well, which people don't realise. But they were just put into those conditions, which it actually said in the file they can't be of a normal standard. Just use the bylaws for sheds, vans and tents. That's the standard to use. Now, it was a 1-bedroom hut. There were prison of war huts from Auchterarder. There was 4 joined together. They made it an extended family project so that basically the people wouldn't argue and they'd stay there. And they threw them in there and said, get on with it. There's a toilet, there's a big sink, and there's a coal fire, and you've got 1 bedroom, on you go. But they put families in there saying, there couldn't be more than 2 adults and 2 children. And then when they had, some of them were put in with 4 and 5 children. And then when they had more children, they would go along and go, oh, it's overcrowded, we're going to take your children. And to me, that was children lifted without legitimacy, if you like. There was no legitimate reason to take the children at that point, but they did and put them into homes. Basically, no electricity, no hot water, with no heating in the bedroom. We had a tilly lamp and candles for studying by, and the tilly lamp was put out about 9:30. So if you hadn't done your studying, well, that's it, hell mend you for the next day. You'd have to find your excuses in school. And they weren't very sympathetic, that I recall, because one time I didn't finish my homework in that time, and I got a row for quite a nasty row in front of the class for not doing so. There was things like if you couldn't take home a plug and wire it up and things like that. You couldn't do that because you didn't have electricity. So you had all that. Hand washing, you had to go out with a big tub every Saturday. That was my Saturday, and scrub with a scrubbing board. And then you had to put them through an old mangle and hang them up on the line to get the wash lines to get whatever air they could before they were taken in and hung over a thing like a trolley in front of the fire to get them washed. And of course, clothes and things would go to the laundrette, but you had to do sheets, towels and all that sort of stuff on a Saturday. So that was your Saturday, every Saturday. And it was basically gender driven or sex driven, whatever you want to call it, but it was women that did it. And I used to throw a wobbly every week. Why are we doing it and they're not doing it? Oh, the boys have got other work to do. And I would go, I'm not seeing them doing much work, so I'm not doing anything. They'd throw the towels down. My mother would get me by the ear and run me over and say, get on with it, lady. And if you don't like it, you better get good marks at school and get a good job. So that's your life.
It's horrific to think about that nowadays.
Roseanna, what did happen to you at school? What marks did you get and what studying did you do after school?
Well, at school, I was first in my class once I learned to read and write. And then in secondary, 4th year was first for English. I got first in English, history, modern studies, Gaelic, second in biology, 4th and third in French, second in art. My poor subject was arithmetic. I only got 76%. Wasn't interested in numbers or maths or anything. So that was, and then I got 6 highers, 2 A's, 3 B's. I can't remember if I got a C or 4 B's and 6-year studies. Did a post-school degree in Celtic studies, English, and did international relations in it too for a year. Basically did well enough, was getting A's, A's minus, B plus. I was borderline first, second class till I took ME. Then I couldn't remember anything much, but I did get through it and get my degree. teacher training English and Gaelic. And then I was in a school I didn't like, which I won't name. And then I did a postgraduate in television production. And I got merits through the medium of Gaelic to bring my Gaelic up to an even better standard. So I got merits in law, broadcast law, health and safety law, what's the other thing? Media studies, and I won a place on a script writing course with Joseph McKee. Then later on, when I was still getting nothing, I was working for the Scottish Gypsy Travellers Association, but after I worked for them, and at the same time, I stumbled upon Tinker Experiment in the library that year, and that's when I started kicking up a fuss. That was 1998 to 99, and then I never got another day's work with a public body, not ever. So that's...
You've done amazing stuff there. I mean, I'm just thinking, media studies, television, Gaelic. Maybe
then
we'll
I
open
went
up
human rights training as well, but it's no
maybe
use.
we'll open up a Gaelic channel and get you to run it. That's maybe what we'll do.
There's just no use. As I say, I got interested then in why nothing was happening, why there was no proper access to justice, which there still isn't. And I did the human rights training with Minority Rights Group International in Strasbourg, came back, and I thought that might get me a job with a project. But I didn't realise that most of the projects were sort of like government satellite agencies at that point. And then I realised, the ones that weren't were being starved of funding, the real grassroots ones, and that's still the case today as well. Mm-hmm. So none of it's any use. I don't even know where the certificates are because I've never needed to use them. I was planting trees, doing acorns, and I go back to the 1895 report, Lynne. Acorn gathering was one of the things that was listed as the occupation of tinkers and percher. My brother's out doing it just now, and he got first-class certificates at university, and when he did his postgraduate in linguistics, applied linguistics and translation studies, he got a reference saying he was clearly the most talented person in the in that year. And they gave him a merit of a certificate of excellence, but they wanted him to stay on and do a PhD. That was Warwick, and it was the 5th university in Britain at the time, number 5 it came in at. He couldn't do it, he didn't get the money, and it wasn't the same way of funding then for PhDs. You didn't attract it the same, you had to come up with it yourself. So that's the education, but it wasn't worth it, Roddy, because the amount of bullying and that you suffered, and you never really get it. It's always there.
Tremendous achievements under the circumstances as well. I mean, makes it even greater. Lynne,
thank you very much.
I want to come back to your Canada trip shortly, but what your group have been asking for is the Scottish government to at least give you an apology. Now, I'm at a loss. Maybe I should ask you. I'm at a loss. If we can apologise for witches being executed in the 1600s and the homosexuals in the 1950s and 60s, why is it difficult? Because, I mean, what I'm hearing, what I've read over these last few days, the least the Scottish government could do is say, sorry for our forefathers. Wasn't us, God, but we apologise. Could they not?
Call me cynical, but dead people don't get compensation, do they?
No.
And the longer that the government can delay an apology, then the less likelihood there is that they have to pay compensation. So if there are any lawyers watching who would like to act on behalf of those who've been injured by the Tinker experiment, please do get in touch. There seems to be a disinclination on the part of the legal profession to assist people in the circumstances that Roseanna and her family, including her brother Seamus and Lynne and her people, find themselves in. And I think that that's a pretty poor reflection on the legal profession. I'm not going to tout for business for myself, but I do think that there must be lawyers out there who would be in a position to assist these gypsy traveller families. They deserve to see justice in their lifetimes, not when it's too late for them as individuals. And Roseanna and Lynne, I sincerely hope that justice is what you are able to see very soon indeed. My understanding, and I know that you'll both correct me on this because I'll not have it quite right, is that there has been some sort of tender process issued by the Scottish Government relative to research that's to be done regarding the experiment.
Mhm.
So what is the process that's been undergone, and does it have your confidence, Roseanna?
No, it doesn't. The people doing it do, because I've been involved. It's the third generation project at St Andrews under the School of International Relations, and I've been involved with it since 2017 when I gave the Indigenous lecture to UNPO, Unheard Nations and Peoples Organisation. They had their General Assembly in the Scottish Parliament, and I got involved with the project on their advisory board. I've since been involved, and I'm still involved, helping to set up a VPN module, which is part of the university degree. And it's built around ethical research. That's why I have confidence in them. However, the tender process went out there in January and it was awarded 23rd of March this year. But since last August, the civil servants have been phoning up and sending scooper-ups out to get the files. And it's no coincidence, I think, that from 1956 to 60, when the height of the removals of children from families were at their highest, 56 to 16. You'll find that in Hansard. That's in Hansard, where, Jai Nixon Brown's Under Secretary of State for Scotland outlines how well they're doing. They've reduced the number of families from 4,265 to 363 or something in Scotland, taking them off the roads, but doesn't say where. These files have been removed. There's other files we suspect were removed last year, and we knew they would be removed. So I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to get everything that they should get, because civil servants, there have been meetings with the Scottish Government Scrutiny Research Group, and the civil servant leading the project has been on it, and he was one of the ones that I believe ordered the removal of some of this, from what I've seen and led to believe. However, never mentioned this to the researchers. The other thing is that civil servants just keep moving on. Oh, it's another one. So you're getting held up now. There's, every time, oh, I'm new, I don't know what's going on, sort of thing. And I don't think it will be fully accurate, but hopefully, because they are ethical at that department, and I have confidence in them, and how they're teaching the young students, because they're doing a module on the Gypsy Traveller community now, which I help with by Zooms. They gave them the reading list and things like that. I do think they'll do their best, but will their best be good enough to get an apology if things have been removed that are crucial? This is the point, and that's, to me, political interference with the process. So how is it independent, and why did they bother doing this? Why waste the money? The current tender that went out yesterday, was it, Lynne, for the lived experience part?
Maybe just to make it, we know this, but maybe just to say that this research the government's undertaken has been split into two.
Yeah.
And you've spoken about the first one, which is almost like historical death research, but the one
That's
you're
right.
going to talk about now,
Well,
Roseanna,
the lived experience one is, as you know, going out talking to victims and getting it says to capture their stories. It's like a storyboard thing, and that's reflected in the funding, because £20,000 is nowhere near enough to do that justice, because the person will need to have trauma training, and I would say traumatization experience, working with people who've been traumatized to do it properly. And the thing is, people are not going to sit down with complete strangers in my community and tell them, oh, this is how I felt when I was kicked in the teeth or dragged around the playground or whatever. They're not going to say how they feel about it. And therefore, they're not going to get to the trauma, let alone the intergenerational trauma, which I think you can explain better than me, Lynne, because you've been looking into that more. So I know I don't have confidence in it, really. But at the end of the day, was it a very inspired strategy to go and steal everything the year before and then put out the tender? No, it wasn't, because I've been looking into it since 1998. So I've got a 25-year lead on the researchers anyway. Hopefully we'll still have enough to prove what we're saying. And I don't think they can get away from the fact that we meet the genocide criteria 4 out of 5 at the UN committee.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just Pitlochry where we had Gypsy families, is it? All over Scotland.
It's all over
Could
Scotland.
I come in? I was just thinking, but coming in here because just going back to that question, Roddy, I think it's important. We're all over Scotland, and that's something that myself and Roseanna and our brother Seamus are looking at as well, to sites that, you know, there's maybe the groundworks are all gone, but, you know, from anecdotal older people in the community are saying, no, I was here, I was there. But it's important to mention the settlements up in Caithness, because in 1938, we had a visit from Wolfgang Abel, who was a Nazi eugenicist. He was invited to come over to the UK, and he was invited by the then British ambassador to Germany, Neville Henderson. And he met with Neville Henderson, and I'll get this guy's double-barreled name wrong because it's double-barrel. It's Douglas Hamilton, or some such name, who was a prominent Tory back in the day and had a house down in Dumfriesshire. Met with him, met with the ambassador and the Archbishop of Canterbury. And in a book called Murderous Science, Wolfgang Abel writes about his time here, and writes that he explained his work on gypsies and travellers in Scotland to these people. So the state and the church knew fine well what was going on and what Wolfgang Abel was up to. And what he did was carried out invasive examinations of children and some adults up in Caithness, measuring their skulls, all the, you know, we know where that leads to. And, you know, you have to think that was 1938, just before the Second World War. If the Second World War hadn't happened, what might he have continued to do with the gypsy traveller community in Scotland? Roseanna's got a lovely wee anecdote about when he was up. You share it, Roseanna.
Well, my dad had told us this story. He couldn't remember the man's name, but he said he was a Nazi. And he said that when they went up to get their heads, their craniums measured, they used to get, when they first went along, to sort of entice them, they gave them a sixpence, all the children. And of course, a couple of weeks later, he said the children were swapping clothes and combing their hair a different way to go back up and get another sixpence. They're getting their heads measured twice or more.
You asked the question, what would happen? I have had, I don't know what the word is I would use, but I've been to Auschwitz. And the Roma families were next to the Jews. They were the most, I can't remember the exact number, but I mean, it was like 500,000 or something.
Well, that's conservative. I mean, the European Roma Rights Centre, I think it was nearer 3 million.
Well, I'm just thinking Auschwitz, there was other camps.
That's certainly what they write, yeah, Roddy, yeah.
And that's what it could have led to. And
that's right.
I just find it barbaric that you live, when you come from Scotland, you think, well, those things happen in other countries. They don't happen in Scotland. No. But as you ladies are beautifully explaining, it has and does. Can I ask, Lynne, you're going to Canada, and this is important. What are you hoping to achieve over there? Just to touch base with people, or are you just information? What's it you're hoping to achieve when you're there?
It's personal and professional. Professional as in I can gather more data to help with my own research and help close off and I suppose to get more evidence to prove my thinking that the migrant children programme was used as a cover to traffic gypsy and traveller children. It's I don't know anybody here that was part of that programme, either gypsy traveller or, you know, other children and young people. I don't know any other descendants out with my own family. So for me, I've arranged to meet with people who are descendants of children that were trafficked. They're not gypsy travellers, but nonetheless descendants. And just to get a feeling of how they feel and how they deal with what Roseanna touched on earlier, what's known as intergenerational trauma. And what intergenerational trauma is that your DNA is your DNA, but the thinking, it's emerged, quite new thinking this, but there's, it's scientific, it's no crazy pseudoscience, is that although your DNA doesn't alter, the way your genes express themselves does. And that's impacted by trauma and past generations. There's a lot of talk about ACEs and children if they've had bad childhood experiences. Or, I don't know if this term's PC anymore or if it's still used, but there used to be this term, Shettleston man, that people live, that a shorter lifespan because, generations past had lived in poverty, and it was almost as if that was inherent in them. And the science now shows that it is, but it's how your genes are expressing themselves. Now, I have quite a rare autoimmune condition and various other ones. So does Roseanna and some of your siblings. So I don't want to mention folk because they're not here. So it's about making that link. So I want to sit with descendants of other children that were trafficked and see how that is impacting on them. And personally, I want to get a bit of closure, and I want to see that the house that they were trafficked to, the distribution centre, is still standing. It's been converted into flats, but it's still standing, and there's a plaque outside. So I want to go to that building, and I also want to go to the local cemetery, which has a memorial. Now, this is interesting. There are memorials in Ontario, which is where most of the children went, to these children. We don't have anything here. No memorials in Scotland yet. I've asked a few times, give us at least a memorial. There's memorials all over Ontario, but the one in the cemetery near where I'm going it's in memory of the children who were trafficked, and it reminds us that what they became to be known as in Canada were Canada's little slaves. So Canada is willing to own that, because that's what they were. Yet, why then can the Scottish government also not own that? We know it wasn't committed in their time, but they could be the bigger people, the bigger government, and recognise it and do the right thing.
Absolutely.
And this is why I can't understand, what is the barrier? Eva touched on it. I think you're probably right, but
prejudice, basic and simple.
And no humanity. Where is the humanity when it comes to gypsies and travellers who had, there was attempts to extirpate them. We had eugenics practiced on them. Wolfgang Abel, Google him, he became quite one of the prominent people in the camps. Yet he was here, so surely
at the behest of the British government as well.
Yes, indeed. And the church was fully aware as well. So
can I ask a question here? You were talking about DNA and whatnot. Would that, these sites you can go to now, ancestry.com and whatnot, would it not be good to get as many of the gypsy I'm scared in case I'm using the wrong terminology. If I do, please just slap me down. And get the whole community and get that DNA up on these sites where you maybe trace more of the ancestors. Would that not be a thing worth doing?
Well, there's looking at us because, in theory, yes. I have, because of that autoimmune condition I've entered a drug trial, and I was given a deep dive into my DNA free as my gift for doing it. So I have that, and I can trace, my DNA goes right back to India. I've got that whole genetic thing there. And it helped me, it helped them move forward with medication for my condition. So I advocate for that type of DNA studies, but Roseanna, I'll put that over to you. You have concerns about
There
how
is a
they could
there is a DNA study that's been running in Edinburgh University. My concerns are that, you know, how it's being used. It's not clear how it's being used because they give their DNA over and they have no more input. I wrote a letter over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, asking for reassurances that this DNA wouldn't end up in a police database or being used for medical experimentation without, you know, consent. I never got a reply. Then 6 people complained. They never got a reply either. Then I asked, I put the idea out there at St Andrews University, and one of the students who was a final year biologist started investigating. She said there doesn't seem to be any actual checks to see who's saying they are a gypsy or a traveller for a kick-off. There's no real checks. So she said it started off wanting 250 people and it went down to 150 because people weren't signing up. But on the basis of this, it's like what St Andrews University said to me, this is like colonial blood quantum, like what they did with the, you know, the Indians in America, and that I may be using the wrong term, first generation Americans. But basically it wasn't used in anywhere in Europe with the Roma for any good. It all ended up in police databases and used against them. Because if there was like 100, not 0.1% of Roma DNA turned up in a crime, they would just go, someone who committed a crime would just go to the Roma community and look for the culprit there. So I'm not sure about, I see what you're saying, Roddy, and it's a good point. But the thing is, and it's another interesting point, is that we're being asked at the moment here and in Fife and in Falkirk and in Ayrshire, I think, and Highland, to sign new tenancies, or in our case, an occupancy. They're now saying your chalet's a caravan, so we don't need to, although it failed the energy proficiency certificate, we don't need to do anything about it because you're now a caravan. We see you as a caravan under the ruling by Michael Heselton in 1991, a mobile home. But a mobile home's not necessarily a caravan, and we're having this argument. And they're saying in it, gypsies and travellers are of a nomadic habit despite their ethnic origin. Now that means your ethnic origin doesn't count for anything if you're not on the road, and people aren't allowed to travel on the road since the 1994 Criminal Justice and Public Order Act Margaret Thatcher brought in, and that was followed up in Scotland by the Managing Unauthorised Encampment Guidelines, which said, oh, it's up to councils to decide what will be an official stalking place, and of course they never identified any since 2004. So there's hardly anybody on the road. They're going about in caravanettes now because they're under the radar with caravanettes more than caravans. Are not as conspicuous, but there are not that many on the road all year round. So you sign away your ethnicity, you're no longer a gypsy or a traveller. It waters down your cultural integrity. They can put anything one they want on a gypsy traveller site, although I don't think many would want to go on it, but they can do that, and they're trying. It's another way of forced assimilation. It's just like the nail in the coffin that was started with Tinker Experiment, but it also takes away your right to cultural rights. Now, in the next year, they're hoping to embed the International Economic, Civil and Cultural, Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Covenant into Scots law. That would give us cultural rights, but if we've signed them away, because if we don't sign this, well, we're putting you out, the threats over your head that you'll be evicted, winter coming on, they're doing it to people. Some people in a neighbouring site signed it and then realised I'd made a complaint because the word got round of 12 points I wanted removed from the occupancy, and I wanted the word tenancy reinstated, and that we had people out and we en masse refused to sign it. My family just said, rip it up and start again, don't come back until you've got something sensible to show us. So if you sign that, you won't benefit from this being embedded in Scots law, so because you won't have any cultural rights next year. This is the point. And the people are being threatened with eviction on the QT on those sites if they don't sign it. Then they're going round bullying, more or less, coming to the door, 2 people saying, we need you to sign this right now. And some people have signed it in a hurry, and now in the next site they've said, no, we signed wait a minute, we signed something that we couldn't understand, we couldn't really read it. We didn't know what it meant, and you made us sign it. So now we want you to come out and read it word for word, 64 pages of it, which I don't know how long that's going to take them. But this is what's going on. Now, in this one hand, you can have two grandparents who are of Gypsy traveller origin and be part of a DNA study for gypsies and travellers. But on the other hand, you've got all your lineage on both sides right back to the 19th or 18th century, or gypsies or travellers, whatever you want to call them. And as Lynne said, part of our family, and they're not as close to the original bloodline as I am. The next generation down had their DNA done 19% Indian, and it's a rare Indian DNA. And yet we can't say we're an ethnic minority, but you can if you're going to give your DNA and your blood for this programme, which you've got no more control over, and we don't know what's happening with it. It might be that it ends up doing some good, but the person running it had a complaint put against them by University College London in 2012 for unethical studies. So I don't know.
What was the complaint that was made against them?
Well, they said that basically that the way in which the DNA was being used in research was unethical. Now, I don't know enough about how it's broken down, but what I think's wrong with it for me is that it doesn't take any account of belonging to a community. You know, it doesn't look at, say, the Mandela criteria, which is the touchstone of race or ethnic origin, and we had to use it in a tribunal in 2008 to prove we were, an ethnic origin, which is long shared tradition of nomadic habit for us, and a common language, the Cant, cultural division of labour within the culture, like, women do this, men do that. I'm not saying I'm a big advocate of it. I used to throw a tantrum from the age of 12 right on, and I'm not got very good housewifery skills as a result, but that's not the point. The point is, this is was all part of the culture, and to some extent still is. There are things that you can't do, and I raised that with this occupancy. I wondered why people were walking in on top of me when I wasn't dressed. And a workman came in with a key and was opening my door. And I said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I've been told to come in." I said, "No, you can't. And why have you got a key?" "I've had it for ages." I said, "But I cancelled this. I said I was going to the hospital," which I was. I was going to see an anaesthetist. And he said, "But I got an email yesterday saying you're not going to be here just to take a key and go in." I said, "Well, I'm here and you can't come in." And I said, I'm complaining about this because this is culturally inappropriate for strange men to walk in on top of women who are in their nightie or whatever else. In my culture, it's just not on. It's, fathers, brothers, husbands. And that's about it. And I complained about it. And then it happened again. So the next time when the person came to the door, I just said, opened the window and said, "You're not coming in." Now they're saying they can do this because we're an occupant. We're not a tenant anymore since 1947. We're suddenly occupants. And I have contacted various legal organisations, but as Eva says, they're not funded to work in your area. This is what you get back, or they just ignore it.
That's terrible. The clock is beating us. Lynne, if I could finish up with yourself. If you got a magic wand and you could get 3 things to change that would make life of the community better, simple things that are achievable, what would they be?
Recognition, and true recognition, and with an apology is part of that, because that is saying the government of this land thinks that you are of worth. It's the same worth as anybody else. So recognition, and that comes through an apology for me. And if I'm being selfish, I would like to see a memorial to the children that were trafficked, but I don't want to see 3 or 4 people looking out to sea like the standard thing. I'd like to see something that's contemporary, that depicts pain and separation, especially for children. So I know that's no 3 things, but recognition by way of an apology is that would be it for me. That would make me happy, and I could live out the life I've got left happy and not have to moan every day.
An effective apology, Lynne.
Yes. Indeed,
Not just
Roseanna.
something they're going to write on a bit of paper and say, here, off
I
you
know.
go and shut up.
Yeah.
Eva, our friend, any final words for us before we close this show down?
Yeah, a couple of things I'd really like the opportunity to say. Thanks, Roddy. It's fascinating listening to both you ladies speaking, and I know there's so much more that you could both say, and I hope that we'll be able to do this again. But I would like to pay tribute to two people. One is Kevin Mackay, who I know was a great friend of both, and it was he who brought the Tinker experiment to my attention originally. Unfortunately, Kevin passed away not so long ago. And the other person that I think deserves remembrance, there's actually two, and they're both your brothers, Roseanna, Seamus and Chick. And I know that the Scottish heritage is very important to your family and to your community, and especially the piping prowess of your family, because I know that your brother was a champion piper. I think two brothers who were champion pipers.
Yeah.
So I hope that one day, sometime soon, Scotland will be able to apologise to your community for the wrongs that occurred, and that you will be able to continue to have rightful pride in Scotland and feel that actually at long last the country has paid to you the apology and the tribute that your family and your communities deserve.
Excellent.
Thanks,
So just to round off, folks, for watching, I hope you've enjoyed, and it's been educational for you, and you've learned something. I certainly have learned a few things today. And I know that we've got some lawyers that watch this programme, and I know a lot of the people from the Scottish Government watch our programme. So if you've been watching, maybe it's time to do something. Maybe it's time to do right by people who have been wronged for far too long. They're Scots like the rest of us, and they deserve to be treated accordingly. So lawyers, politicians that are watching, do something. And to the rest of you, till we see you again, please, 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 take care.
Thank you.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.